I'm happy to be here to talk to you a little bit about Kentik's network synthetics. This is a really kind of a cool thing that Kentik has taken on in the last couple of years, a really good feature to fill a gap that we had in some of the performance monitoring that we wanted to get from the network that wasn't coming from our network vendors. So there are some vendors that do this, like Cisco. They do things like a performance monitor feature set. But a lot of routers and switches don't want to take on that sort of workload in order to get performance data. So I want to go in here. What we want to be able to do in terms of observability is to be able to answer questions. So what that means is to take data that's coming from the network and then put it in a place and organize it in such a way that somebody can ask a question. So when I think about a flow record, so a lot of you here are familiar with what flows look like, right? You have a source IP address, destination IP address, ports, packet counts, all that stuff, but there's not a lot of context that comes with that. So that by itself is not a good story. It's almost like the flow is kind of a noun, but it's not a whole story. It really needs more context. You need the verbs and the adjectives, punctuation and all that stuff in order to build the story to tell what that flow is. And so one of the things that we do really well is we take that flow and then we take a lot of other metadata about your networks. And when I say networks, I mean, today we have a lot of different networks that we're dealing with, and a lot of people are dealing with multi-cloud. They're dealing with their on-prem, and those are separate teams that are doing different things. So you need a unified way to understand what's going on and add context to all of that traffic and what's going on in that network. So everybody asks what the network is, but nobody ever asks how the network is. So we can bring that stuff together and provide what's considered real observability. So instead of having a flow log come in from AWS, we can add context to that and say, okay, well, I know what the name is of this instance, so we can add that to the flow record as we're ingesting it. And so now we have all of this information, this metadata, whatever happens to apply to that specific record that we can get our grubby little hands on, and we can put it all together. And this just kind of blew my mind once I realized this. You can customize the enrichment. You can take all data, your own custom data out of your own CMDB, add it, and enrich this data 9 ways till Sunday until you have what you want to ask that question. So really, this is kind of a way to do that. And within synthetics, we also use the network data that we're collecting in order to inform some of the visualization in synthetics when I get to that part of the demo. So when we look at this diagram here, one of the interesting things is all of the things on the left side is kind of the data that's coming in, and then we have the middle part where we're doing stuff, we're ingesting that data. So when we look at this, when we say cloud, there's different clouds. We have a bunch of different clouds. We have a bunch of different maybe devices, different vendors, all this stuff. So we want to be able to take in all of this data from all of these different data sources instead of having to buy tools for each vendor. So you're going to have this fragmented data set amongst a bunch of different tools. And this is the problem that has happened and plagued enterprises for as long as I've been around doing this stuff since 1995. You got to make a choice, or you get locked in, and then you end up not happy with the end result. So we're vendor agnostic. So we work with all of these different vendors, all of these different cloud providers, and we take the custom data out of your network, because everybody's network is their own little snowflake, or networks, I should say. And so taking all that data to put it in one place, so you can just go and ask a question. I can say, all right, what's going on? Like, there's something going on. Go into Kentik and take a look. Is it going to give me any insights? Yes, right? So if there's something odd going on, we'll let you know about it. You can also set thresholds and that sort of stuff, like your normal stuff. And so basically, once we get all that data in, we're doing a lot of work to it. And then on the other side of it, we want to be really fast. So that's the other part of this is big data, right? So we're dealing with some of the largest networks in the world, and they demand having low latency queries. So I need to get this answer. I was talking to one of our prospects the other day, or in a meeting, and they said they had to wait a day and sacrifice a goat in order to get the answer back when they're asking a question about the network. So one of the things about Kentik is that we're a SaaS platform. You don't have to worry about running your own infrastructure. So we're taking all of the data, we're doing all this wonderful stuff with it. You don't have to hire your own SRE. You don't have to buy a bunch of boxes. You don't have to put them in a data center. We'll handle all that for you. We'll just take your data, and then we'll do this with it. And then when you have a question about what the heck's going on, we can answer it for you really quickly. And it's going to be there. So having worked with a lot of network management platforms, people kind of forget about them until they really need them. And a lot of times when they have that box in the corner that's supposed to be working over there, and then they go to log into it, and for whatever reason, because it's big data and it's a complicated thing to collect that much data, they find that the database crashed and I don't have any data. Just another slide on just kind of give us an idea of the scale customers that we're dealing with, to be able to pull in all of this data across across the world, essentially. They're sending all this data in. So these are really big customers, generating tons of data, and they're extremely happy with the product so far. So I don't want to kind of get too far into this. I want to go and get out of the slideshow type of thing. I just kind of want to show a little bit an overview of what synthetics, what it does, essentially. What we have is we can place agents all over the network. So whether you're in cloud or whether you're on-prem, any of those different places, and from our interface, we can schedule essentially tests that are running to check continuously as to how the network is performing. So you could do tests every minute or every 15 seconds, or you could do them every 30 minutes, just to get a glimpse and essentially a DVR of what the performance was across the network from different vantage points. So what that means is sort of monitoring digital experience. And so having these different vantage points across the network is extremely important to understand from a network perspective what is going on and where the problems might be occurring. Traditionally, people would have a single network management box that would be doing things from a central location. But really what that didn't give us is any information about, here to here. If you have a really complicated network, a ping from one spot to another spot, or one spot to, a hub and spoke model isn't gonna give that. And since essentially the cloudification, and then once COVID hit, everything is sort of disparate and a lot of SaaS, very SaaS-y, I should say. So when I start talking about what types of things that we do, this will give us a little bit of an idea of like what these types of tests are. So when we look at this, there's like web-based testing, there's DNS testing, routing, and what we call network testing, which is essentially the ping and the trace route and that sort of thing. So you can see there, there's a bunch of different things we have in terms of what's available for setting up tests. So when we go to add a test in the product, we see those different options, and I can talk a little bit about what each of those are. But before I do that, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about how the agent works and what's going on with that agent. So when we look at this, I'm kind of going from the OSI model from the bottom up, and this is going to get a little bit more technical as to what is going on inside of this agent to create these tests. So when we look at this, we see there's a section overall it's saying synthetics agent, and at the very bottom there's a process, and this is like Scamper. And if anybody's familiar with Scamper, this is something that's used to run network tests. So we have things like ping, traceroute, jitter measurement, uses Paris traceroute, so we can look if there's multiple paths that traffic's going. We will be able to identify that there's multiple paths. And then you look at things for like TCP connections. So I just want to make sure I can connect to this, but it's not necessarily going to do anything with that connection. It's just going to make sure that connection can happen, and it's going to measure how long it takes. So the next thing, if we're looking at DNS testing, because it's never DNS, but we still want to be able to test it, right? Is it? Is it never DNS?
It's always DNS.
It's always. Thank you. I thought somebody was going to yell that out. Thank you very much, Avi. So we've got that, and that sort of kind of falls into the network testing bucket. And so that part of the agent is for that lower level type of thing. So you can deploy these agents on constrained devices if you want to use network testing. So running those things like pings from, say, a container on a switch. So a lot of the vendors now offer the ability to run a container, but they're pretty limited on what they can have for resources. So that's kind of perfect for something to run for somebody that doesn't want to actually deploy some sort of a small box or Raspberry Pi type thing, or spin up something in a VM on every location. If they happen to have capacity on a switch, they can do that. And so running an agent in just network mode gives them the capability to do those types of tests, but not have to fully pull in the transaction testing or the web testing. So as we go up the stack a little bit, we can see like application testing. And if you're familiar with Puppeteer, and is it, anybody know what Puppeteer is? I'll maybe explain that. So Puppeteer is a way to automate testing of web pages. So it can do things like load a page for you and give you the results of it. And that uses Chromium, so Google Chrome. So it's essentially a platform that allows you to take Chrome and run testing against it, just like you're an end user. So what we've got is some things that are like a basic page load test, and then a transaction test. So when I say a transaction test, that's a little bit deeper, and some people call that like deep web monitoring. So if you need something that actually goes to a page, enters a username, logs in, moves to the next page, clicks on this. So you want to make sure this page is actually working. That's that sort of level of things. So from here, this gives us the ability to have a constrained device working in a network environment where people can actually run tests, on their network, like they would with their normal caveman tools. That's what I like to call those. When something's going on or something is going wrong, and you can't quite figure out what's going wrong, the first thing you do is you're going to SSH in and into something and start pinging and doing trace routes and trying to understand, is this actually working at the network level? So on the caveman tool level, we're automating this and doing that consistently so that you can always go back and look and say, well, when did this start? Or how bad is it? So when we go and without having SSH in.
Agent, are you typically deploying this? So does it also deploy on Windows devices? Are you saying that this is deployed on a section of Windows devices? Is that Chromium testing? Do you put it on all your switches? What does the agent deployment look like?
So really, right now, our deployment is focused on Linux. We do have a lot of customers that ask about Windows, and this is usually runtime user monitoring. This is usually a question more towards the digital experience monitoring and end user monitoring. So people want to install this on end user boxes. That's not something that we're quite focused on. We're more kind of providing tools for enterprises to monitor what's going on in the network, and then inward from that. So one of the things we also do is we have agents that run. So we host our agents all over the world. I'll show you that a little bit as to what that looks like. But yeah, I think, Avi, do we have any plans on a Windows-based?
Yeah, yes, but we're not focused on the desktop environment, which is for the first version of that. It's more for people that want to do, I think, as the gentleman was asking, more of the browser and application testing, but maybe from data center and cloud, but not yet towards the end.
So once we get to this, I get to the synthetics dashboard. And so the first thing this is going to show me is a list of the different events that have happened. So I have tests that are configured, and this kind of gives me a timeline of what's happening over time. And I can see whether they're still active, whether they've been cleared, and I can easily drill into those and take a look at what those are. Some of the other things that we have, and this is a really popular feature within the product, oops, is mesh testing. So one of the things that people want to know when something's wrong is they want to be able to quickly look at something and understand that there's a problem. And so what we see here is a representation of a bunch of different sites that are testing against each other. So being able to understand if there's a problem really quickly is very important. So when we look at these different mesh tests, we can see these are different sites that are speaking to each other, and we're running tests between those, and we can see which ones are having problems, right? So, and as the problems get worse, it becomes more obvious. And when we look at that, we mouse over these, and we can see if there's heavy packet loss. So we've got no connectivity from here to there. So that gives a good indication that there's a really big problem here. Or I can look at this and I can see that there's high jitter in this environment. If I want to drill into this a little bit more, I can go here and take a look at it. And so what we've got here is some more information about the environment, some of the data that we're getting from these devices, putting it all together. So when we look at this, we're taking data that's coming from ISP core seed, ISP core B. This will let us know what the traffic is between those two locations that we know about that we're getting from flow data. So rather than this just coming from synthetic data, we can actually look at this and say, oh, well, I can see a spike. There's something different going on. In this case, we're not seeing that. So it's probably not a congestion issue between different sites. Then I can go over here and take a look at the average latency. And so what we see here, you'll notice there's a little gray band right here. And what we're doing is we're doing a rolling baseline of the measurements that we're taking. And we can set a standard deviation for an alert based on what the traffic normally does. And the reason why this is important and the reason why it works so well for people is that we want to know if something starts to go wonky, if it starts to go wrong. You don't necessarily want to have to go through and look at it and say, well, I know this much latency or this much jitter is normal, and then have to set a static threshold. That stuff changes all the time. What you really want to know is, you want insight as to when something's starting to change, that standard deviation, that rolling baseline, is something that you want to do. So really what we do here is we calculate that standard deviation. We look at the last 15 tests that we ran and what the results are on those, and then we calculate that. And that's that band that we're seeing here. And if we go outside of that band, that's where the status of things change. And there's different levels. You'll notice some of them are critical and some of them are warnings, that sort of thing. So this really gives you a good eyeball full of what the performance was between those different sites as we're running those tests. So as a network administrator before, there was all kinds of things that I would try to do to try to understand this between sites. Like, what was the historical record of this? And it was really hard to set up notifications for that, and it was really hard to understand, like, is this normal or not? This makes it a lot easier for you to configure, say, a mesh test between all of your sites, in your clouds, wherever. Set all that up. Once that's set up, you're collecting all of those metrics, and when something changes, it becomes very obvious. So that's a really nice thing to be able to do with this. And we're doing this for whether you're losing packets, so you can see, like, we lost one of the 5 packets that we sent. Right? So it was a 20% loss of the test at that period, and we can see there's different time frames. And I can change that to a wider time frame. I can look at this for the past day. Test. So if I want to go add a test, I can go and choose any agent. I have the ability to look at what we have is the idea of private agents. So these may be ones that I've deployed myself. And I can kind of go through and I can select which agents I want to run a specific test from. But we also have the Kentik agents. So what I can do is go down here, and what we call these are global network agents. Global network agents have the ability, or are ones that Kentik hosts that you can use. And so we have a bunch of different types of agents that we can utilize. So we have things that are cloud-based, and then we have ones that are eyeball networks. So we're adding more of those as things go by. A lot of people want eyeball networks. We look at that. We want to maybe zoom in a little bit. So as you can see, we can see where they're hosted. And I could see like here. So I want to look at something, maybe Portland, Oregon. Maybe that's where I want to be running a test from. So I can have a geographic selection of where things are going or coming from. Add one of those. And that gives us the ability to utilize those agents to do that. And we have those all over the world. I can give it a name. I can say, put in a list IP addresses, something like that. My test. And then if I want to set up a notification, I can do that. We have ways of sending this out via custom webhooks or like ServiceNow, whatever you want to receive these different notifications. We'll kind of give you all of the information that we have about that specific test and why it's failing via notification or open tickets. So I go through and I save that. Take a look. Here are the different options we have for configuring. So we can see here, you can go down to 1 second in testing. So basically that gives us the ability to run tests continuously all the time if you really need to know. Some customers want that. As a general rule, people want to run like 1 to 5 minutes. And of course here I was talking about some of the standard deviations. That's where I can go and say, I want to notify based on milliseconds or standard deviations. So you can do a hard threshold if you want, but generally this is the way people want to configure those. And then we have a bunch of different logic as to how we can configure these, whether we're using TCP or ICMP as far as pings, and then also with traceroute, UDP, TCP, and IP, ICMP.
Yeah, I have a question. Just around the agents, do you have any kind of appliance, like an OVF or anything like that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Our deployments will install on Linux systems via package managers. So we have repositories on Package Cloud, and then we also have Docker containers. We don't have virtual appliances that we do. So what you probably would want to do is roll out like an Ubuntu image and launch that, install that service or install that Docker container.
And how well do they scale? Say a 2 or 4 core VM, how many devices could you expect to manage with that?
So for network testing, it takes a lot less resources to run those types of tests. Once you start to use some of the app testing, that depends more dependent on memory and cores available. So I generally would say if you're going to use an app agent, you're going to want to have at least 4 cores and maybe 8 gig of RAM to start testing. But if you're going to do a lot of tests on there, you're going to want to scale that up a lot. But basically, that's up to you how you want to deploy those. But really, at the end of the day, it depends on what that testing looks like.
And just lastly then, on your Docker implementation, is there any kind of load balancer in front of that? At that scale?
Nope. You could implement your own if you wanted to. I guess you're talking about like if you're putting a load balancer in front of it to test a bunch of resources outbound, or
yeah, I'm just thinking of just ways that it'll scale on the agents there.
Yeah, I mean you could launch as
Seems to be a
many
good bet.
you could launch as many services as you want, and then scale across multiple say containers or services on the same box, if that's what you're looking for.
But it's not auto scaling itself at this point. Those are things that we look at based on what kind of infrastructure a customer has on the back end. But those are both the having OVF or other packaged VMs and some of the scaling are things that we do hear from customers and are looking at.
How much buffering can these agents do, both in terms of time and in terms of capacity? Because if you're having network connectivity problems, you probably want to gather those analytics, even though you can't actually push them to where you need them.
So, in terms of pushing where you need them,
Well, I mean, into your Kentik cloud, capabilities or your on-premises repositories. But if you have an agent that's sitting out somewhere that can't actually talk to where it wants to put the stuff, does it have some capability to actually gather the statistics until the network comes back?
Oh yeah. So no. So as we're running these tests, we don't queue up results. So when the network connectivity is broken for that, then we'll essentially report back to Kentik will report that the agent is down.
Okay.
So
what happens if, for example, a remote location when the agent goes down, and it has been down for several times? Then I can't see what in that remote location the network devices did. I can't see if they were down as well.
Right, that is an error condition where if you look in Kentik today, you'll see tests from the outside in and where they are failing, but it could still be a question of, is there no result, or, because there was actually, everything was down, or the agent was able to get, and today we don't see what the internal network state at that location was if we have connectivity broken. So it is something that also that we are talking about is, do we do that delay and retransmit? The historic reason we didn't build that in is because with some of the telemetry types that we're used to taking with flow and streaming telemetry, the data is so voluminous that you wouldn't ever catch up. But with synthetics, it is something that is more tractable and possible. So that is something that's, I wouldn't say it's in the short-term roadmap, but it's something that we are hearing and thinking about.
For us, that would be, we are a service provider. For us, that would be important because I want, sometimes a supplier cuts down the internet pipe.
Right.
But my SLA still requires that my customer network is up and running.
Right.
So I would then have no data if they had downtime, yes or no.
Right. We would see from the outside in that they couldn't get to you, and from if you had no connectivity to Kentik. So if BGP is working, then within some brief period of time, the agent there should be able to see, even if it's, for example, sourced or policy routed, so it's going out each of your transit links. We should still, I would say we would usually be able to get that telemetry. But if BGP is up and connectivity isn't working, and it's trying to get the telemetry to us about a failure, that's an example where today we might lose that data and give you, and not be as useful as you would like for SLA negotiations or just debugging with your provider.
And everything is collected into one big virtual machine. So there's you can't distribute the load. So I have the agent
Right.
that passes through the data, but I don't have several appliances each collecting load and maybe together form a cluster also.
Right. So the synthetics backend is run as a service on our software as a service cluster. So we have one in Frankfurt, we have one in Ashburn, Virginia. We have private ones that we run for mostly service providers that say they have data governance and they can't let data out of the country. So in Japan, we have multiple providers. In Canada, in Europe as well. In the US, we have some providers that say the whole Kentik service, everything must run in our network, and then we'll just go, deploy the cluster in there in that infrastructure. At the edge, for pretty much all of our agents, that's something we're looking at this year, the question that came up, which is, do we want to have an opinion about an OVF, load balancers, and auto scaling? Most of our customers, as they've started, have had a lot of edge locations. And for example, one core on Vultr, DigitalOcean, Linode can do thousands and thousands of network tests per minute. But and so that's very deterministic. But as Mike said, when you start doing a Chromium script, it could do anything a browser can do. And so the auto scaling question comes in much more there, which is maybe there's a rogue script and it's taking a lot. You don't want the other tests to stop. A lot of our early customers for this have basically had their own load balancers or their own, that want to scale it with Kubernetes, and health checks, in which case they just deploy, the Docker image and do that. But we are looking at how we would take ownership for that to be probably more of a virtual appliance, than physical appliance that would deal with the scaling, itself. But you would probably have more than one location of this anyway. I don't know how many POPs you have, or or cloud, but most of our customers wouldn't run only one location for all the testing, because even if you're application focused, there still could be a network component where something performs differently. But again, that's something that we're looking at to be less DIY on the hosting of these things. I'm more on the ops. I am the CEO, but I deal more with the ops group, so I know some of the backends. And we're doing our we call it ICE, but our product roadmap review this afternoon. So I have some more data. So
yeah, that is. I think the scaling question is a fair one for that. And it is a good idea, especially for that type of task.
And we've seen it on the network traffic side too. So
yeah. So and part of this too is like having a good API to maybe do that. We have a full SDK, a really, really robust API. So if you really were kind of wanted to pay attention to what was going on, it would be really easy to implement something that would help scale things up. And I think maybe that's just us automating that side of things, right?
I think this is a little bit more about, for people that are hosting it, how do they not have to build the control infrastructure?
Right, yeah.
And is it up? Is it out of capacity? How more instances needed to be built? But some people have Kubernetes, some people have VMware, there are some people that have Zen. Some people do KVM with Proxmox. So there's a little bit of the differences, and not everyone can agree, OVF, VMDK, how they want load balancing to work, whether it should be in a service mesh. So those are some of the things that you look at.
What I was going to mention, on the Kubernetes environment, we do have a Kubernetes operator that allows you to deploy monitoring within the cluster for services. So that's something you can check out on GitHub if you're interested in looking at that. So that's one of those things that people kind of take for granted is in Kubernetes is the network. Everybody's thinking things about the application level, and they don't have that network visibility. And I think that's what we're going to have Karina talk about a little bit in the next presentation. So I think that if there's any other questions, I can hand it off.
Do you work with Istio? Do you work with Lincoln as well?
With Linkerd?
Yeah.
We have some integrations we've done with Envoy, but not Linkerd itself. So we followed that since it was finagled at Twitter, but we see less of that in our customer base. And the other thing that can Istio work with Linkerd?
I don't think so. I think
okay, because the Istio developed a plugin architecture for telemetry, which is sort of why we started there. And then some people said, okay, well, but I'm deprecating Istio, and
I might on a certain level. I know they compete pretty much because at the service mesh level.
Yeah,
but
but in some sense, Envoy competes with Linkerd, also as the. I don't know. I get confused because there were sidecars. Now people don't want to do sidecars,
and mesh,
and now the network layer is going to do it too. So I get a little confused.
That's very confusing. That's why we need this, right?
It's like standards. What's the wonderful thing about standards? There's so many to choose from. Yes. There are some BGP and other things in here, but we're trying to stay, more up towards the application side. So if people are curious, we could.
So one of the things that we have here. Let's take a look at the BGP route viewer. So I'll just take the networks. So one of the things that we do in Kentik is when you first set up, you want to declare what your prefixes are and what your ASNs are. And this helps to classify the traffic and do some tagging. Helps you understand what your traffic is. So I can go in through and look at some of these things, and I can say, I'm looking for prefixes to monitor. Do I want to look for origin hijacks? So these are all things that we want to be able to look at. So I'm adding all of these things that we've already predefined within the product earlier in order to look at the route views for this. What this gives us is we'll render a chart of time series to let you know what's happened for your network that we've just declared. So I can go through and say I want to look at this specific prefix. And so this gives us the ability to visualize what that path looks like. And then we can do that over time. So as we see, we've got time series. We can see if that changes over time and to understand like what happened in a really, really nice way to look at this. So once we go and we can visualize this and kind of see what we're configuring and what we're going to be monitoring, then we can kind of go through and we can create a test based on those. So I can just basically go and say, configure this monitor. I can set up my notifications. Some different options. So you can see there's less options here for this. We do this. One of the things that we're doing is we're using public data sets, and I believe it's route views, right?
Yeah, route views, and we have thousands of BGP feeds that come to Kentik, so we can't all show you each other's updates, but we can see if there's hijacking of BGP prefixes. There's other parts of the product we're not going into that also do something called RPKI validation, which is, being a good citizen and helping other people figure out who owns what and protecting yourself. Sort of like DKIM, but for IP address space. So there's actually a lot of the BGP things, but because people are used to, even though this is sort of not synthetics, people are used to the BGP hijacking detection being part of synthetics. That's a piece of the product here that we do also for folks. And sometimes there's analysis, again, like there was an outage, there was an outage last night. You saw some synthetics things, you're talking to your provider, and you want to see, well, what was going on with BGP. There's some other BGP things we do. For example, if you're trying to figure out who to buy transit from, we'll show you by market who the biggest, best connected providers are. We actually know how much traffic they have, but we're not allowed to show that also because it's your data, not our data. But from a BGP perspective, that's the skeleton of the internet that's out there. So we have some things that can show that. So
you can use my data to see if someone else's network's been hijacked.
I can use, if you are a newer customer of ours, our MSA says that we can share updates from your BGP feed, but none of your NetFlow or Our older customers, our contract basically said we couldn't do that. So we can count from if half of you saw, a hijack, I could add a counter that said the hijack was seen, but I can't say who saw it if it's from my customer data. Yeah. So that's why we use the route views data, the Oregon Route Views project, which I highly recommend for BGP debugging also.
I use it every day.
Yes, exactly. And we're toying with the idea of making a multi-network looking glass because we have these global agents. If you show the map of where the agents are, around the world from a ping and trace perspective, and we see all the BGP. So we're trying to think about what operator tools for people actually debugging this stuff. Mm-hmm. We're trying to come up with good ideas for cloud, but all we have is the DNS and other testing because cloud is more opaque. So we have agents all over the place in cloud and networks. So like how could we skin that? In the product, you can go and say, I want to do those tests, I can see BGP. But sort of like looking glass functionality is a feature of that BGP visibility also. My inner nerd says it's not really synthetics, but I approve putting it there because that's where customers ask us.
It's real. You're measuring real. It's not. Yes. It's not fake.
That's an automated check.
Right? That's true. The testing is the looking at the structure history is sort of in the middle. It's in the middle.
Yeah, I think it was the right place to put it.
Yeah. Yes, that's what everyone told me. And we have smart people. Yeah.
One quick question. Can you talk a little bit about the alerting function? I mean, it's great if I lose my peering or it's not great if I get hijacked, but so in terms of alerting and if you can have different conditions, like if this and this condition, then do certain alertings, different teams maybe, and you could show or talk a bit about this?
So our notification, as you saw, some of the configurations as to say like how many subtests, for instance, are things that we could say, like if you've got a test that's running 5 agents and you want to say like if 3 of them are there, you can set that up. So going through and like configuring what the thresholds are of when you're going to get notified of that, then we go into the notification side of things. If I go and say I want to add notifications, I can basically set up what I want to be sent to or where I want to handle that from. I think.
So if you had, reframe the question maybe and tell me if I understood. So let's say I have prefix set 1. When something happens to that, I want to have notifications go to Slack to my NOC team. I have prefix set 2, which might be my customer set. Maybe that goes to my email. So you could define multiple tests and have different notification channels per test, one of which goes to Slack to a particular group and one of which goes to email. Or is it, I'm learning about the
Or are you
product
saying
myself.
like if both
Or
of
is it
these-
all BGP notifications would have to go to custom webhooks and then be filtered out?
Well, it's obviously it's per test, but I was kind of thinking of it as like what you're talking about is this test and this test is failing, and now I have a third option to do,
Right.
so like have it deep. So
Well, I guess that's a separate thing,
Yeah.
but
Yes,
are you
like-
talking about like
well,
different kinds of prefixes alert
It's not
differently?
just prefixes. Well, it's some prefixes, but it's like how flexible I'm with the
Oh,
conditions, right? Not just like, okay, I lost a ping, well, whatever, right?
Yeah, okay.
But if
General.
I lose a ping and it's going via this transit link,
Mhm.
and it's, I mean, hypothetically,
Right.
it's between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. where have most users come in, right? So
Yeah.
that flexibility.
So on the performance testing, there's some, if you pull that up, there's a lot of that flexibility. We don't have that as much on the BGP side today.
Okay.
Now, all of the alerting can go through the webhook so that you can have your filters. But again, that's something we look at is that requires you to do some work. So we think about what can we do in the product for that. But when you set up alerting for the performance testing, there are a lot of threshold type things, not quite time of day yet. Time of day you would need to do, I mean, it's not a silly idea. I mean, the way we roughly think about things as opposed to a security platform is this worth waking someone up? Because, SIMs are, anyone run a SIM? The machines that go bing, right? Just because when you have a thing that alert, a line that goes in, you're not going to wake someone up. But a lot of our customers, if they're sending it to PagerDuty, the person may be on call, but they might be at dinner or something like that. So we don't quite have, I think of it as the route map, like the if-then complete tree. So sometimes people use API connectors, will push the webhooks and something like that. But it's something that we're actively looking at right now is how do we add the right workflow complexity. And on my negative roadmap slide, I said we're not trying to be a workflow engine. So try to balance that because there are people that do that very well, but solve the operational needs. So those are things that we're thinking about. But
Thanks.
You mentioned PagerDuty. Can that be time-based? Like at night or during business hours, we don't get a pager, but just service now call.
I think you probably can.
Outside business hours, we get pager call as well.
I think you would be able to configure that on the PagerDuty end, right?
Yeah, I think that's how people do it, either directly in PagerDuty. That's not something that we've put back into Kentik, but I'll take the feature request, whether you're a customer or not. It's just, it's like a lot of the adjacent things. We want to be careful about how much we do because we're not going to be the full workflow platform for someone. But it is something we also want to solve the problems that people have without requiring them to go do all the work. So,
I see their expected monthly credit usage. Is that part of the licensing? How does your licensing work? Is it agent based, device based?
Yeah, that's a good
monthly
question.
Credit usage.
It's a great question. So the way we do things is consumption based. So you can send out set up as many agents as you want. Register those with Kentik. If you're not running any tests, you're not going to burn any credits. So that's a really nice thing to be able to say because people maybe want to plan for being able to deploy these tests, but they don't necessarily want to deploy them right now. So what we do as we build these tests, so like as you add agents, this will kind of in real time let you know how much of your expected credit usage is to whatever your license limit is. So this gives you a good idea of like where you are with your gas tank full of credits, right? So it's a nice way to understand like where you're at in terms of where your licensing is without having any surprises.
And credits are cheaper when you run private agents versus if we're paying public cloud for the usage. So if we were hosting those agents around the world, then it's double the credits versus if you run yourself.
So is that a bolt on to the number of devices and management or something like that?
We include 2.5 million credits with every customer,
Platform.
if they do other things in a platform fee. But yeah, then people can buy extra credits for whatever testing they want to do. We also, become customers of some service provider customers so that we can do the agent stuff, although that's not a product-based defined thing.
Since you guys are pulling in flow data, you notice a problem with the synthetic monitoring, can you drill in and see which segment of your clients would be most likely to be impacted versus ones that are not?
We do something that's a step towards that, which is showing you, and we have some alerts that can trigger only if traffic is affected. So if there's a performance problem, but no traffic was dropped, what's the sound of one ping dropping? An empty network. But it would be a script-based thing using our APIs, and we have people that will do that. We'll see something and then look at, either what's related to the AS of the agent, or just, which customers had traffic affected at the same time to either notify their own folks or not. But more towards the direction of those integrations, like interface error, as we add full SNMP, and synthetics, tying that together, because do you have interface errors on your network? Yes. Do you know what they mean? Probably not, sometimes. So like tying all those things together into unified alerts is work that we're doing this year.